I didn't see that before when you asked me, so just kind of conditioned myself to be ready to look for it, I guess.
Sam, so I know Natalie's going to be here, so I think we can.
We should be good. Yep.
Start in a few minutes. I call the Charlottesville City Council August 19th, 2024 meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Okay. Ms. Oshrin has indicated she'll be a couple minutes late, so I'll mark her present once she
Yes.
arrives. Councilor Payne,
Here.
Vice Mayor Pinkston,
Here.
Councilor Snook,
Here.
Mayor Wade.
Here. Is there a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
Move for approval of the agenda.
Second?
Second, and Natalie's coming in. Okay, can we cast our vote, please? Okay. She's coming. All right. Okay, so the meetings will be divided into 3 sections. The first one will be a work session where we will hear presentations and we will not be voting. Then we will go into closed sessions, and then we'll come back at 6:30 for our regular business meeting. We have 2 reports today. The first will be from the Food Equity Initiative with the FY24 report. Aline, are you all right?
Hello, Council. My name is Aline Carey, and I'm here with my colleagues tonight representing Cultivate Charlottesville and Food Justice Network. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is KJ Howard with the Food Justice Network, and I am a program associate.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Thayer. I'm the newest addition to the team as a co-executive director.
Welcome.
Tell them where you came from.
Yes, I'm from the Bay Area, but I moved here from Phoenix, so I'm enjoying the cool weather here this summer.
So we present to you guys each year as part of our Food Equity Initiative at kind of end of year, which is now between August and September, to let you know what we've been doing. All right, next one, please.
You can grab the clicker here and control it.
Oh, perfect. All right, so this is just a little background information on Food Justice Network. I think all of you all are pretty up on what we do here in Charlottesville. The big thing is that this is a group that brings together around 25 different organizations that are all working in the local food system with the goal of making Charlottesville a more food equitable place. We talk about Charlottesville being a foodie town with lots of gourmet restaurants, farms, wineries, but we are still moving it towards a food equity town, and that is the main aim of Food Justice Network. This is a lot of the different organizations are represented here with their logos. One thing I would call to your attention is that Local Food Hub has been part of the Food Justice Network and part of the food system for a long time. They have ended their programming and will be sunsetting the organization at the end of December. So between Local Food Hub and also PB&J leaving, shutting down operations, that leaves a pretty big hole in the food system and the work that Food Justice Network has been doing.
Can I interrupt real quick? Is there a way to get this monitor going, or maybe it's... And what did you say, ma'am, that had been shut down or closed or?
So there was an organization called PB&J, and they closed 2 years ago. And then Local Food Hub has been around for more than a decade, and they stopped operations in June and are sunsetting the entire organization, another nonprofit, at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just ask you, while we're interrupting your flow already,
Yeah.
what did those two organizations provide in sort of the ecosystem of food equity?
That's a good question. So PB&J had a space across from the library, and they were working with youth and teaching about healthy living and eating skills. So students were able, or young people were able to participate in different camps, after school activities with that organization, and learn about what to do with their food, along with where their food came from. We used to do a camp with them where in the morning students would be in the garden, and then in the afternoon they would go over to the PB&J kitchen and learn to cook some of the things that they had been harvesting. So both PB&J and then Local Food Hub were part of the planning team, the initial planning team for Food Justice Network when it was started in 2015. So there were about 7 different organizations who were always seeing each other, always running into each other, and said, we should kind of pool together for resources and making sure that we're not redoubling efforts in the food system here in Charlottesville. So Local Food Hub, before they were a 2-part organization with Local Food Hub as the nonprofit and 4P. I don't know if you're familiar with 4P. That's a warehouse arm. They had been one big nonprofit, and they were working with farmers, making sure that they could get local food to people in Charlottesville, whether that was schools or the Fresh Pharmacy program. Are you familiar with that? Okay, Fresh Pharmacy was something where doctors could write a prescription for their patients to get fresh food. And so there would be bags every week that had fresh produce, but also meat and sometimes dairy products as well, that residents could pick up at certain places through that Fresh Pharmacy program. So having both PB&J and Local Food Hub not part of our local food system is a big loss. And there are ongoing meetings about will we be able to continue some of the things that they have been doing? Do we have the capacity to do that? Talking about staffing, funding, reach to be able to fill in some of those gaps. But the Fresh Pharmacy program for sure is something that people have relied on for a long time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Hold on here, let me see. The only person who's not here who's also part of our team is Trinity Hughes. She's also a program associate and local of Charlottesville, graduate of Charlottesville High School. Okay, I'm not getting this. Do I have to point it at something?
It is a little magic.
Point more to the wall and see. Normally it works, I don't know.
Okay,
Just say next slide.
next slide then. Okay, next slide, please.
There we go.
Yeah.
I mean, so an important part of our work in local food system is looking at the sustainability and longevity of our programs. And so a crucial component of that is how we're involving youth and developing leadership as the future here in Charlottesville. So every summer we host a summer food justice internship program. You can see on your screens, these are our last cohort that just finished up about 2 weeks ago or so. This is a paid internship program that lasts 6 weeks in the summer for high school students here in Charlottesville. We provide immersive food justice leadership training components to them. We provide experiential learning opportunities within our garden network. And so we have a garden site at City of Promise within a number of the elementary schools, K-Tech, and also Charlottesville High School, that we are exposing the young people to how they grow their own food. We work with them to plan on how to advocate for healthy school meals in the schools of which they're attending. We have a focus on the impact of food justice and then how to step into leadership as a local leader and what does that mean on the local food system landscape. And we also have been working this year to develop soft skills and hold workshops for job readiness, such as resume building, interviewing techniques, so that they're building their capacity to enter the workforce. And then, next slide.
All right, so as far as Food Justice Network and Food Equity Initiative go, originally, Food Justice Network came to City Council and said, this is what we think is important when you're talking about food justice or food equity. And so the key areas that you all can see are transportation, affordable housing, urban agriculture, neighborhood food access, healthy school foods, with that center of core advocacy and action areas there. When we first presented this, the feedback was, tell us more. We need to know more about how these different areas intersect and have anything to do with food justice, really, and food equity in Charlottesville. So we embarked on some community engagement. We had something called an EPA Local Food, Local Places grant that helped us to bring together people from nonprofits, community members, anchor institutions, even some private equity to see what the community was thinking, wanting, and hoping for food equity in Charlottesville. Next slide, please. So we came back to you all with the Food Equity Initiative, and with all of the information that goes along with this, we're just showing you the key 6 areas. We call them the 6 planks. There's a huge report that you all have that goes along with this as well. But we're looking at food equity and justice, the power to grow, the right to good food, inspiring youth choice, building community wealth, and restoring earth and climate. So what we said is, in the Food Justice Network, we are amplifying these different areas, and some of us are experts in some of these different areas. So for Cultivate Charlottesville, let's say, we are not the experts on building community wealth, but we do certain things within our organization to do that, and we work with other organizations who do build community wealth. And then we know a lot about the power to grow. We know a lot about urban agriculture. So that's a place where we might take the lead and be a little bit more out front. Something like Inspire Youth Choice, because of City Schoolyard Garden. Again, we have a lot of experience working with students, experiential learning, as Ryan was mentioning, and school gardens. So the Food Equity Initiative policy platform, which is a mouthful, is what we talk to you guys about each year. It's us coming back and saying, these are the different things that we have done within these 6 different areas. All right, next slide, please. So you all actually passed, or City Council passed, the initiative in 2018, and it's a partnership between us and you all. So you all are saying, we are going to fund this. You all in the broader Food Justice Network, not just Cultivate Charlottesville, but the broader Food Justice Network, you guys are going to do the work. You're going to do the community engagement, participate in the thought leadership programming, and come back with recommendations for the city. And one way we do that is by meeting with the different city departments and seeing how each area does and can have something to do with food justice here in Charlottesville. Next slide, please. So your question could be, well, what are you guys doing though? What does it actually mean? So the work that we're doing can fall into these 5 different areas of community engagement, amplifying resident voice, collaborating with city departments, as I just mentioned, partnering with other nonprofit neighbors, and pursuing strategic change for food equity in Charlottesville. Any questions about those key points that are up there? Okay, the one thing I will say is those first 2, the community engagement and amplifying resident voice, are the most important part of what we're doing. Instead of us you know, Ryan, KJ, and I aren't saying this is what we want to see. We're saying we've talked to community members, whether it's through having folks out to one of our gardens or us going door to door or any number of engagements, and this is what people are asking for when it comes to food justice in our city. All right, go ahead.
I do have a question, actually. Which city departments do you work with most often?
We do a lot of work with Misty Graves, and Charles C's here today as well. We have been partnering very closely with the new Office of Sustainability. One area that I think people can not see right away, the intersection between food justice and climate justice, but there's a heavy intersection there. And so even though, again, we're not the experts on climate, we can talk about and work towards how those intersect, the food justice and the climate justice. And Ryan's gonna speak a little bit more about what we're currently doing in that arena. We work closely with the different markets. So there's City Market, and we also work with Ix Market to try to make sure that they're also thinking about food equity, whether it's access to SNAP or the IRC New Roots farmers, who IRC is one of our key partners in Food Justice Network. And just this year, they've introduced that there will be 2 kiosks or stalls for the IRC New Roots farmers, so that they have a place, a dedicated place where they know they're going to be able to sell their wares. So we meet with every department. We still have a few more meetings to go this year because we're presenting to you a month earlier than we did last year. But we're checking in on an annual basis to say, this is what we've heard, and what are you guys doing, and what have you guys heard as well. So trying to make the connections, bringing, you know, the voices of people in the community in, and hearing what's possible as well. Transportation is a huge issue, and how it intersects or overlaps with food justice as well. So all of those meetings are very important.
Great, thanks.
And you all received a packet before today, and you can see each meeting that we had is laid out, and it'll show you like key accomplishments from last year, this year, and what we're looking for the next fiscal year. So I didn't put all of that in the presentation, but it's something that you guys can refer to as well. All right, we're ready for the next slide, please. Is that the very next one? You might have skipped one. Can you go back one?
You might need to say it into the mic.
Is it possible to go back one slide? Oh,
No. Okay.
and then the next slide?
That's like
Forgetting, I gotta get directions. Okay, well, just really quickly, I'll speak to before we hop into the Power to Grow, the slide in front of you, is our work that we're starting to get more plugged into around climate change and the connections to food systems, as Aline was mentioning. We're excited to submit an application for the joint effort between the city, the county, and UVA in their climate resiliency cohort. We're really hopeful we'll be able to get approved within that application, and looking at how we can build on our expertise of community engagement that we've done through this effort with the Food Equity Initiative and the hundreds of community members that we've engaged with participatory planning efforts around general plan and comprehensive plans into the climate action plans that are looking to be developed across the different region. And really looking at the importance of how a changing climate impacts our food system. Many people don't really pay attention to that or take it for granted of everything being on the grocery store shelves. There was a report that got recently published around Nashville only has 2 days of food. If there's a major climate event, a city like New York only has about 1 week of food. So we haven't done a report like that in Charlottesville, but we are at kind of the mercy of the greater forces around our global food system, and is really speaking to the importance of how we can invest locally in our local food system and ensuring that we remain resilient in the face of some of these larger climate events that could seriously impact our availability to feed ourselves. And so we're really excited to for the opportunity to join the county and the city and UVA in this effort and other nonprofit leaders, and continue to be that voice for the importance of local food systems and how we bring the lens of equity and community involvement into shaping our local action plans and comprehensive plans.
So before you move on, you mentioned grocery. I was going to ask this a little bit later, but now it's a good time. The idea of the grocery store on Cherry Avenue, and it's my understanding they're having problems finding a tenant for that. I mean, that was a few months ago. Maybe they found someone. Are y'all having some say in that, or input, I should say?
Yes, so the idea of that grocery is definitely part of Food Justice Network. So we're not running the community engagement, but we are participating, and they're actually using the model that we developed for our Power to Grow at Booker T. Washington. They're using that community engagement model with the 501 Cherry Avenue grocery. So what I know about that is they're really hoping to be able to have a person of color as the tenant, as the grocery tenant there in the neighborhood, traditionally black neighborhood of Fifeville. They've been looking at different options, whether it would be more of a traditional grocery or something like a co-op. I know that they visited Harrisonburg because Harrisonburg has a co-op, and a few other Virginia areas where that has worked. I think that the obstacles that they're finding is a person or an entity who could purchase that, who could be the tenant. And right now, I think, again, they're really trying to make it something that's person of color owned. And then the other piece is about whether or not it becomes a co-op. I think there's a lot of people who don't understand the co-op model, whether those are folks of color or not. So whether or not people want to participate in a co-op model is another thing that's really up in the air right now. So there is somebody, Deanna McDonald, who is running the community engagement. She's been working closely with Lisa Drain, who's another community member who has been involved in a lot of food justice issues, and they're trying to bring on community advocates right now to do that same kind of engagement that we did last year of surveying, listening circles, different ways of checking in with neighbors to find out how they feel and what they'd like to see in that space. So it's not completely off the table yet, but they are up against a little bit of a time crunch. Woodard owns it right now and is, holding that space for the potential of a grocery and for the possibility that it could be owned by people of color.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello, my name is KJ Howard, if you've forgotten already.
Yeah, hey, KJ.
So for this last year, we came to you in September. We had a lot of positive feedback from the 3 to 5 mile diameter around Booker T. Washington Park, the communities that reside within there. And from those community members, we received a lot of feedback of only really having Integral Yoga and Reed's as the only grocery stores that are close by and walkable distance and easy for folks to get to. They're also the only 2 that we have currently that are locally owned. So at the moment, we are working with Parks and Recreation to kind of finish the master plan, and hopefully it will be completed by this month and going to action in the next few years. And we could go on to the next slide. And so within the survey data from last year, we had a lot of people mention about increasing accessibility of fresh produce, encouraging community gathering, creating a space for volunteerism. And I think having a community garden at Booker T. Washington Park would provide opportunities for teaching classes and having community members volunteer to give back to the community and meet with youth engagement, to have elderly folks get with youth to build community bonds and kind of increase the friendship and mentorship that elderly folks of our community could have with the youth that we have at the moment. It would also create a great space for farmers markets and to get a lot of local black farmers and people of color farmers to Booker T. Washington Park, because a long time ago during World War II, Victory Gardens were a major connector to Washington Park for a lot of black farmers in the Virginia state. So a lot of people would come together to share recipes, to share their preserved vegetables, to meet and share tips and tricks with each other. And it became a very impactful space with the barn being there, having local events being held, concerts, all these like amazing things that came from the black community is something that we would like to reclaim and get back into our community. And so with that, we also do community market days at Kindlewood, Riverside, K-Tech, West Haven, South First Street, Crescent Halls, and Mickey Drive, and having a space where it would be so central to Charlottesville and local for people to transport to there, to be able to walk there, take a bus. It would be a lot easier than going to some of the corner areas where we have our grocery stores set up in the city currently. And we can go to the next slide. And so here we have some of the data from last year. And with this, we had a lot of Charlottesville residents that would like to see the garden engage with outdoor schooling, peaceful courses that could help with children and seniors, having yoga there, or other community events that might be like the Jahumba Festival, having it down at the bottom at some point, and bringing back the community choice and voice to see what is grown into the garden and have a choice in what will be provided back out to the community. Since we are losing local food hub by the end of the year, Fresh Pharmacy will be gone. And due to that, a lot of residents will lose out on fresh produce. So being able to have this resource where they can come to Booker T. Washington Park and receive free produce is very important. And it also is a great way to connect people back to the earth and the community around us. And we can go to the next slide. So this slide pretty much gives us a breakdown of everything that we did last year. So we started out with the community advocates and community youth, or I apologize, apprentices, my apologies. And the apprentices, which I was also a part of, we were a group of interns that started off in about 2015 or 2016 at Buford. We started as doing the community garden aids that were set up at Buford. We started a class period during that time, and with that we would interact with the community by gardening and kind of doing that course during the class period, and that transitioned into us becoming staff members here at Cultivate and coming back into the community to continue the work. So by May and July, we had gone out to do door-to-door surveys in all of the communities near Washington Park. And then by August, we had started listening circles. So from all the folks that we surveyed initially in May and July, we got them back together into 7 different groups set in different areas of the community to get back together to talk about what we surveyed them about and kind of the future steps of having a garden in Washington Park. And then by September, we held a roundtable with all of our survey data, some quotes from some of the residents that were there at the listening circles to kind of further the discussion. And we also were able to do some garden planning to see kind of what community members would like to see at the garden and how they would like for it to be positioned. So by way of that, in September, we also spoke with UVA students of agriculture, and we were able to get them to do a couple of different mock-up designs and go through different ways that we could implement the park, including orchards, areas for, areas for farmers markets, local areas for beautification of the area. And so since then, recently, we've been talking a lot with the Parks and Recreation and going to the advisory board meetings to kind of further our points and the things that we've been reaching out to the community to speak about. So we're looking forward to the master plan to be completed soon. Is there any questions I could answer?
So I just, it was my understanding that, because we got a few emails about the garden in Washington Park, I thought that we had kind of green like that. Is that still need some final approval or something? But,
Last year, when we spoke to you in September, we received a lot of positive feedback from you all. But Parks and Recreation is doing their master plan project right now. And so what's going to happen, they're going to talk to you about it. They're all here to talk to you about it. They're going to give you all the information. So it's a little bit, we're on pause.
Right.
And we have to see if the community engagement that they do matches with what we said, basically. So they are talking to a broader swath of people.
Right.
They're talking to the entire city of Charlottesville, where we concentrated more on the people right around Booker T. Washington Park. So we are continuing to, we've partnered with them over the years for, for all kinds of things. Even our city schoolyard gardens, some of them are owned, the land is owned by the city. So we've partnered with Parks and Rec for a long time. And we really, really hope that what they see in their community engagement supports what we brought to you all last year. And the reason we're talking about it again is so that you can keep it front and center in your mind and remember that you gave it a soft green light. But you will get a presentation and a recommendation from them, hopefully at the beginning of 2025. And we would like for that to include space for an urban agriculture collective garden. So if it seems like it's a little redundant, it is. We wanted to make sure that you don't forget about us as we're talking about it.
And just to be clear, we never voted on anything.
Right.
We have never
No, there's no vote.
given anybody a green light.
There is
I know
no.
we talked about it.
There
I'm
is no
sure.
vote.
Right.
There is no vote. You have not voted on anything. You gave us positive feedback,
Right.
but you didn't vote on anything.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next slide. I'm not going to read all of these to you. Again, this is out of the presentation or the packet that we emailed to you at the beginning of the month, but I'm going to hit on just a couple of key things. So on this slide, one of our key collaborations was with the UVA School of Architecture. KJ just mentioned that we had them do some mock designs once they got community input on what the space, the urban agriculture garden space, could look like at Booker T. Washington Park. UVA Morven Sustainability Lab is one of our key partners, and we've been working with them for a number of years, as well as as to what does agriculture and sustainability look like in our entire area. And then next slide, please. We had one back, I think. Yes, please. Okay, we had 2 visits from the EPA. One from the regional administrator. He brought his team and got to meet students who are working at Charlottesville High School, where we have the urban farming classes working. We also had a visit from EPA, I guess 3 weeks ago, to our K-Tech space to see what we were doing and get to interact with our interns a little bit. Another key collaboration we have is with Heal Food Alliance, which is a national organization bringing together folks from all over the country who are working on food justice. So we have been participating in the Farm Bill advocacy. The Farm Bill should have been passed and hasn't been passed, and there are a lot of implications for food justice. So we've been working on that and participated in their annual summit in New Mexico. Next, please. All right, also local festivals. We try to get to as many local festivals as possible, including things like Healthy Streets, Healthy People, the Children's Festival down by the Bog, which is in Booker T. Washington Park. So you do get to see us out and about quite a bit. That very last one there, 22 community members engaged in healing in the garden gatherings. We have a partnership with the Women's Initiative, and we've been doing healing in the garden, bringing together their mindfulness and our gardening for women of color. Our next event actually will be at Crescent Halls because we're taking it to the kitchen. People have asked for more. Once we've given them plants that they can grow, what should they do with them? So we are collaborating again with the Women's Initiative on September 28th to have another event, and a local apothecary will be helping out with that as well. Next slide, please. Ryan spoke a little bit about climate justice and food justice, so that's a key area where we are putting a lot of time right now and a lot of focus. And that last bullet there, the Resilient Together Climate Resilience Cohort, as Ryan mentioned, we have signed on to be a member of that. We still had to do an application process and meet with the county and the city, but we are very hopeful that we will be accepted for that and be able to continue the work at that intersection of food justice and climate justice. And then next slide, please. Healthy meals in there. So a while ago, during COVID, during the pandemic, we had just started a partnership with the Charlottesville City Schools Nutrition Department around healthy school meals. So what we thought we were going to do right away changed because of the pandemic, and we had to focus a little bit more on providing meals. And we had a model where we raised funds to pay local restaurateurs, mostly Black and brown restaurateurs, to make food that we could then deliver to different pickup areas. That was a model that we suggested for the school system that they might be able to use as well during the summer when Parks and Rec and some other entities come together to do meals for students. So that is something that we're still working with them. We're in our 5th and final year of the Healthy School Meals Partnership. So we're hoping that some of the things that we've suggested over these last 5 years to the school system will be picked up, and that they will be able to bring in a farm to school coordinator, be able to provide meals during the summer. So those are a couple of the key pieces that go along with youth voice and choice around food. I went through those very quickly because you have all of this already, but do you have questions? I'm not going to read them all to you, like I said.
Any questions? I know we've been kind of asking them as we move on
Okay.
along, so.
All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan for our last few here. Next slide, please.
So these are just highlighting some of our growing spaces in our network of our Urban Ag Collective and also the community farm that we've had at K-Tech. Can you go to the next slide, please? And here are some amazing photos of the work that we're doing out in the community. Next slide. And the fun part. So budgets are often a reflection of our priorities, and so we've been really grateful to partner with the city for so many years from a fiscal standpoint so that we can implement and coordinate the food equity initiative throughout the city. I can go more into details if you prefer, but I just want to hit some highlights to bore you the details. We're able to achieve all these accomplishments that we've mentioned today with relatively a small budget. It costs Cultivate Charlottesville a little around $450,000 to operate this program effort. Of that, about a third is funded through our partnership with the city at around $155,000. The majority of these funds goes towards supporting our staff time that we've mentioned a little bit. We strive to hire from within the community and partner with the communities in which we're working with, and then being able to provide employment opportunities to those community members as we can, and also towards community stipends. And so we value the community's time and their effort for participating both in community engagement activities like surveys and focus groups, and also as interns and community advocates. And so everyone is paid for their time either as an hourly wage through our leadership training program or getting other financial incentives for participation. We really see this as a reflection of the importance of our partnership between public and the community, and how we can go forward in reaching our equitable goals, particularly around food here in Charlottesville, and continue to have the community voice to have a seat at the table in how decisions are being made and how we're implementing our comprehensive plans here. Next slide. So looking ahead, we look to have a really busy year upcoming. We're continuing to prioritize our community engagement efforts and convene our community stakeholders through our Food Justice Network to move forward with how we're implementing the Food Equity Initiative policies. And an important piece of that is working with our Community Advisory Committee of community residents and helping to direct the decision-making on the Food Justice Network. As we mentioned, working on our Power to Grow initiative and continuing to work and partner with Parks and Rec around hopefully identifying growing spaces and beginning to implement growing spaces at Booker T. Washington Park and Azalea Park, so that we're able to increase our ability to address community food security within the communities of where people live. And to also continue to further the city's food equity plans. And so we're able to provide support and guidance and community connections for how we're addressing food equity across different city departments. And again, continuing to bring our community engagement processes to the fold, and so that those voices that we often don't hear from are being able to be brought to the forefront in how we're making decisions that are impacting the way people are living within their communities. And looking at how we can continue to partner with our local agencies to support the implementation of those strategic plans, and how the work of the departments can be prioritized and met with the needs on the community level. Given the local context of the food system and some of the sunsetting of some of the institutional organizations here, and some of the delays that we've talked around with the city, around the comprehensive planning process that has put some pause on our efforts for implementation. We're also asking if we can continue this partnership and the funding support, so that we're able to renew our status at the same funding levels and support our ability to work within supporting the city and also our community partners within the Food Justice Network. And next slide. So thank you again for your time and taking the time to listen to us and hear us out, and we're hoping that we can continue this partnership. I don't know if you have any closing comments.
Do we fund you primarily through the VCF, Vibrant Community Fund?
No,
No,
you
from
fund us
the-
directly.
It's from
Okay.
the general fund.
Got it.
That is the question that you all will need to consider, because the arrangement that was put in place multiple years this will be the end of it. So you would have to make a determination on continuing through the general fund or inviting them to apply through the VCF like all the others, which is different, but that's a question.
Okay.
Any other questions?
You guys do a lot of work. So,
Well,
thank you.
we couldn't do it without not just the funding, but people being willing. The city is willing to talk to us, and the departments are willing to meet with us. As we've been working with national other organizations across the nation, what we hear is that their cities or towns are not even willing to meet with them. So when we are talking about, we have this partnership, they're saying, how do you get them to even, get into a room with you all? So it is a really important piece of having you all as thought leaders and collaborators, not just funders. So we want to thank you for that as well.
It's good to see KJ a member, a student, and
I
now
know,
look at
I know.
Yeah. So thank you.
He's come a long way, right?
Yeah.
From just being an intern to now
Yeah.
being part of our staff. We're very proud. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Parks and Rec. Thanks. Ann is here in a new capacity.
Yep, and he's here. Mayor, Council, this is a status update of our comprehensive master plan. Again, it's been, we're on month 8 or 9 right now, and we thought that this would be a great time to bring in pros consultant, Mike Sweats, the principal, is to give you where we are with our comprehensive master plan. One thing I do want to say, I would really like to thank the staff. They have been putting a lot of sweat and tears, being out in the hot summer, doing community engagement with the community. So if you do see a Parks and Rec employee, please stop them and say thank you. Mike?
Good afternoon, folks. Mike Svets, principal with Pros Consulting. I guess we will do the next slide, please. So this evening is really just to lay the foundational framework for the master plan. The last time we talked with you, it's been a while, but we just kind of gave you the process overview. The last several months have really focused on the community needs assessment and the engagement that we have done with the community. And the reason this is critically important for Parks and Recreation is simply Parks and Recreation is about providing experiences. And it's about trying to align the highest priorities of the community with what those experiences should look like, both self-directed in parks and facilities, as well as obviously through programs and services. So tonight is really just to kind of hit the highlights. We could spend 2 hours going through all of this and you all would be blurry, and I would be as well. So next slide. First thing we kind of wanted to share was just the volume of engagement. So we kind of balanced this between in-person engagement, in which we had close to 35 to 40 different meetings, whether they be focus groups, stakeholder meetings, public meetings, meetings focused on the site-specific framework plans, council meetings, advisory board meetings, and of course, one of the things that we started to do was to do intercept surveys, and we flipped that into what we feel like is a sustainable community engagement initiative for Parks and Recreation to work with Misty Graves and other departments to do outreach events. And 4 of those were conducted this past spring as well. So again, close to well over 600 folks engaged us in these up to 35 or 40 different type of opportunities to meet with people face to face. Next slide. In terms of, we also have a project website and we have done surveys. We have done a statistically valid survey, which I'll touch on here in a bit. But we have a project website that has had over 6,000 site visits. That project website has had over 1,000 master plan surveys taken. We've had a mapping exercise in which over 600 folks have provided comments around that. And then we have the site-specific master plan surveys out there as well. So there has been a lot of engagement. And we're going to try to do our very best to summarize this to give you an understanding of what those foundational tenets or elements are associated with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan for us to build upon. Next slide. So just the kind of some of the themes that came out of the focus group and stakeholder meetings. Parks and Recreation is a conduit to community building. Partnerships with, Cultivate Seville and others, really you have an opportunity to leverage resources. And we feel like this is a foundational component. Government used to be in the business, especially Parks and Recreation, of providing things directly. But now it's about partnerships and understanding that Parks and Recreation has an opportunity to be that community builder, in part for the city of Charlottesville. Reinvestment in the Parks and Recreation system is critical. Trails and connectivity was a theme that came up time and time and time again. River access, environmental education, sustainability, and of course, sustainable funding sources and increasing in staffing levels. These were, out of all of those 20 meetings, these kind of boiled down to the same thing that kind of kept coming up over and over and over again. Next slide. In terms of the outreach events, Crow Community Center, Jenkins Park, Forest Hills Park, Washington Park. So these were events in which Parks and Recreation, other city departments actually went to the community to solicit input, to have fun. And they became really powerful, well-attended events. Some of the key themes that came out of that, they loved the staff, loved the programs for kids, loved the low cost. Actually, walking in parks and use of spray grounds were some of the most participated activities. How people learned about Parks and Recreation was primarily through word of mouth, social media. Some of the needs that started to bubble up as part of that were swim lessons, diving, enrichment programs, community events. So it's not just one type of program. And then restroom cleanliness and continuous outreach to the community are most desired. So we talk about, in the focus group meetings, it came up about being a conduit to a community builder. A method around which the community has said is they want more of these kind of events. If they want it to be continuous and not just be a part of Parks and Recreation master plan process. Next slide. So we did the statistically valid survey, so I'm going to move from words to numbers. For some of you might be more willing to gravitate towards the data. This is a survey that was done in partnership with the city, administered by ETC Institute. We have worked with them all over the country and Canada on these, and they do a ton of work, not just on parks and recreation, but transportation as well as others. The goal for this survey was 350 households. We got 392. Needs to be demographically and geographically representative of your community. Next slide. So this first slide, next slide. So this first slide kind of gives you a sense of where all of the surveys were returned from. Every dot does not represent one single survey, but it's a cluster. The idea is here is to show that every part of the community, with the exception of obviously where people live, was represented. This is not something in which it came from one very specific part of the community or another. And you can see that part of what we have done as part of this map is also to recognize the grouping of what we'll kind of call planning areas for this exercise. So Parks and Recreation worked with Neighborhood Services to identify how to take each of the neighborhoods in Charlottesville and cluster them based on either demographic and or geography. And the idea here was to take all of the city and break it down into these 8 different areas as well. So why this is important is you'll see later on as part of the presentation that we're actually able to take some of the survey results and cross-tabulate them based on these geographical areas. Because recognizing that what folks in 10th and Page and Rose Hill might want could be very, very different than Fry Springs and Jefferson Park, or Fry Springs, Johnson Village, Jefferson Park area. Next slide. You can see that we had strong representation. This is not to indicate that kids took this survey. It was mailed to 18 and older, but when people took the survey, they were answering on behalf of them and members of their household. So I think this is key to recognize as we start to think about these results, is people were not just taking the survey for them as an individual, unless they were only the individual that lived in the community. Next slide. Or in that household. And this is the race ethnicity breakdown. White Caucasians, about 68%. I think Charlottesville is right around 65, 66. Black African Americans at 17%. I believe Charlottesville is right around 15 or 16%. And then you have the other ethnicities and or race segments represented. So the idea with these first is just to hopefully give you a sense that, we did a good job of trying to reach the community as a whole. Next slide. So one thing we want to first talk about is advocacy. Next slide. One question that we asked very specifically was level of agreement that folks had with the potential benefits of Parks and Recreation. To try and summarize this, I'll be very brief. So I have that red vertical line down the middle of the graph there. The red vertical line is to indicate the 50% level of whether people are strongly agreeing with each one of these statements. And with the exception of helps to reduce crime in my neighborhood and provides information in navigating aging services, the community as a whole strongly agrees with every one of these benefit statements at a level of 50% or more. This is important because it's a good jumping off point for advocacy and people finding and understanding the value of what Parks and Recreation brings to the community. Next slide. Park utilization and condition. Next slide. This is off the charts. I've done this for, 12 years now, 13 years, and have not seen a slide this well represented. So basically, we're asking whether or not people use parks and facilities in the last year. 94% said yes. National benchmark is 76%. So, and this is, we don't even get these kind of results when we do just an open-ended online survey. So this is exceptionally strong, and it shows that your Parks and Recreation system is loved, and maybe even to a point where it's overused. Next slide. So it would not be, I guess it would not be a stretch of the imagination to say if your parks are getting used that much, how do people rate the condition of them? Basically, about 11% of your community is rating it as excellent, 44% very good, 35% good. This is not a bad report card per se, but in terms of the A grading or the excellent rating, usually the national benchmark is closer to 27%. So we do have some work to do, but of course, this is part and parcel based on usage, but it's also part and parcel based on maintenance, as well as then the need to continue to reinvest in the system. We did dive a little bit further on the maintenance slide. Next slide. And this was a question regarding the satisfaction with maintenance activities. There's only 2 here that fall below the 50% level of very satisfied or satisfied, actually 3. Some specialized facility maintenance, dog parks, and restroom maintenance, unfortunately, kind of comes at the bottom. If we're going to provide restrooms, we want people to have a high-quality experience. It's one of the basic needs. So we'll probably have some work to do in terms of bringing the restroom maintenance up to snuff. Next
Can I
slide.
ask a question?
Yes,
Before we get
absolutely.
to the next slide? For the dog park off-leash maintenance and care, does that mean there's not enough dog park space, or people think that people are letting their dogs off the leash in parks when they shouldn't be?
There's not, well, it's more about how the dog park off-leash areas are being maintained. And I will tell you that it's kind of difficult to maintain off-leash areas that are designated for dogs simply because they get beat up a lot. And if you don't have enough of them, it's hard to close sections of dog parks or off-leash areas for people to use. So the idea is to kind of create more of a system of off-leash areas as part of your parks and recreation system, so that you have the ability to close them randomly and or close pieces and parts
Spread
of
out the
them.
wear and tear.
Exactly.
Okay, but it's not an issue of people letting their dogs run loose when they shouldn't?
No, we're not necessarily seeing that at all.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure. Next slide. Program participation quality, same exercise. In terms of the utilization of programs and events, it's at 31%. National benchmark is at 32%. So pretty much right on par. The one thing I just want to point out very quickly is that we had 96% or 94% parks facility usage. 31% of that is made up of programs and services. So you have another 63% of your community that are using your parks and facilities through self-directed activity, walking in a park, taking their, playing on a playground. So I think it's important to recognize that though this number is low, it is not necessarily low in terms of people using your parks and recreation system as a whole, and of course against the national benchmark. Next slide. In terms of overall quality, this is a better number. Excellent is 24%, national benchmark is 23%, and you've got about 2/3 of your community saying that your programs are either excellent or very good. So A or B report card, that's pretty strong. Next slide. In terms of facility and amenity needs, next slide. This is broken down to high priority, medium priority, low priority. It's a combination of needs, importance, and unmet need. And so what you see here is, let me explain it, I guess, a little bit more on high priority, medium, and low. High priority indicates that your community finds something to be needed, important, and also has a high level of unmet need, or in essence, wants you to do more of or provide more of that. Medium priority means it's kind of relatively right-sized, and the low priority you can see is all sport-related, which is very skill-specific or special interest-specific. We typically see sports being, and athletic fields being on the lower end because it just appeals to a very significantly smaller age group or special interest group in your community. For example, the most participated sport in the country is basketball. The percentage of folks that actually play basketball is 7%. Even though it's the most participated sport, still only 7% of the country participates in it. So I just want to put that in perspective. So what you see on the high priority is trails, natural areas, trails, water, river access. All of that really speaks to Charlottesville's green thumb outdoor recreation natural area ethos. Environmental education is there. Community gardens is there as a high priority as well. So you see that almost everything that we identify here is very true to Charlottesville's community values. Medium priority, again, means that you have it right-sized. Next slide. In terms of breaking this down by cross-tabulation, so what you see here is all of the high priorities in the kind of the white area, and everything across the screen in the blue with the dots is the city-wide priorities. But then breaking that down by each of those kind of planning areas, 10th and Page and Rose Hill, Ridge Street and Fifeville and so on, you start to see why the city-wide priorities are what they are. But then you also start to see that 10th and Page and Rose Hill has also additional high priority needs. Picnic shelters, community facilities, swimming pools, all accessible amenities, a little bit on Ridge Street and Fifeville. So what this allows us to do is to understand geographically the parks within each of those geographical areas, that maybe when we come up with the improvement plans for them, we need to integrate some different thinking. We don't just look at the citywide as a whole. We look and see as a starting point, what are some of those other amenities that we should be considering for those specific areas. Next slide. So we'll do the same exercise. Next slide for programs and services. You can see here that there are a smaller number of high priority programs and then a large number of low priority programs as part of this exercise. Outdoor recreation was #1 off the charts, very much aligns with what we saw in the top priority on facility amenities. Farmers market, art and culture, special events. 4 very different kinds of programs and services, all within that high priority. And then the medium priority and low priority. You can see that the lower priority is very, very skill specific, age specific, or special interest specific. And so therefore then, again, it doesn't mean that you don't offer these things, it's just recognizing that you have a very small target market. Next slide. And then when you look at this from a cross-tabulation perspective, again, you can see why the city-wide priorities are what they are, because they're pretty much a high priority across the entire community. But then look at 10th and Page and Rose Hill. This is where you start to have additional high priority needs that are above and beyond what the city has. And the same thing with Ridge Street and Fifeville, as well as then just senior programs for the Meadows area. So again, this gives the department an opportunity to say, if this is who we're trying to attract to this facility for this kind of program, this is where we need to hold it, this is who we need to market it to and make aware. So again, this is not to say that we're going to focus on just 5 programs, because you start to recognize that based on where you live and who you are, you may have very different needs that the department needs to focus on.
Can I ask you one question
Absolutely.
about this screen in particular? The locations across the top, are those the locations of the people responding?
Yes.
Or, so, for example, if somebody in Belmont wanted to have more availability for lap swimming, would that have shown up as an interest expressed in that column, or or are we looking at the fact that the nearest lap swimming for them is going to be at Smith Pool? And
No, it's about recognizing that the people that live in each of these geographical areas have this need. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to correlate and provide that need in that geographical area, because we can't have, for example, lap swimming pools in 8 different, right? But the idea is to say, are there any differences? Like, if you looked at this and you said, okay, Parks and Recreation is going to create awareness around 5 very specific programs, and we're going to, change what we do from a recreation perspective, and what we're going to do is we're going to really focus on these 5 specific things. Well, we know that no matter who we tell, that those 5 specific things are pretty much going to appeal to everybody, with the exception of 10th and Page and Rose Hill. There are only 2 high priority programs in services in 10th and Page and Rose Hill that are also citywide, and that is the Farmers Market and Art, Culture, Dance, Enrichment, Performing. But then 10th and Page is above and beyond the city as a whole. They also want group fitness classes. They also want swim programs, and so on and so forth. So this is where it allows us to not just understand what the community as a whole wants, but how do we make sure that we are providing programs and services of the greatest need at a much more granular level.
What's the threshold to get a dot? So let's say someone in Locust Grove said, I want to do lap swimming, but they were the only one, so there's no dot.
Right.
But then there is a dot for 10th and Page Rose Hill, but maybe, like, how was that calculated? Was it a percentage of the people from that area and you had to clear that threshold, or if five people from Rose Hill responded, but 100 people from Rose Hill responded in general, and 5 people from Belmont responded and 5 people from Belmont responded in general, like,
You're generally on that right path in terms of the statistically valid survey. The factors that go into determining high priority, medium priority, and low priority, they vary across every survey that we do based on the number of people that respond and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, we have to have, in order for this to be statistically valid, we have to kind of have about the same number of surveys returned from each one of these areas. So that's number one. And then number two, it's a synthesis of the data around need, importance, and unmet need. So we're not just measuring if something is needed and important, because if that need's being met, doesn't necessarily mean you need to provide more of it. I am happy, I don't have all of the data, but there is reams and reams and reams of data and cross-tabulation that shows the responses for each one of these based on percentages for the city as a whole, and then of course for each of the geographical areas. We've also done the math based on household type as well, meaning that if you have kids under the age of 10, you have a very different recreation life mode than if you're 55 and older. So we have that data as well to kind of break it down that way.
Okay.
It's in the entire report.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. But you're totally spot on in terms of like how it all works. Next slide. So community support. This is where we start to take all of those needs and say, are you willing to fund it? And so the top 2 things that people are most willing to fund are expand, improve trails, walking loops within existing parks. So yes, connectivity is important, but people want a safe place to walk at their neighborhood park. Number 2 was take care of what you already have. And then number 3 was develop connections to amenities. So 2 of the top 3 that people are most willing to fund really are about walking for exercise, connectivity, trails, loop trails, and being able to navigate getting to spaces and places, whether it's parks to home, park to school, school to home, basically by means other than just in a car. Next slide. In terms of taking what you're most willing to fund and then asking the question if they have a preferred level of additional tax rate financial support for the improvement of parks and recreation services, assuming that you're spending that money on the things of highest priority. Basically, what we're seeing here is that 54% of your community are willing to have an additional tax rate of 1 cent for parks and recreation. So you've got 34% for 1 cent, and then 20% for a half a cent. And so I think what we're at here is to recognize that you have people that within your community that are willing to support a higher tax rate to support parks and recreation. Just something to consider. I know this is done in a vacuum. We're not asking the trade-offs between that and police or fire or so on and so forth. But this ties back to the benefit statement of simply the matter of parks and recreation being willing, people valuing parks and recreation in Charlottesville. Next slide.
Is this something we're legally allowed to do? A separate parks tax?
I
As a
don't know that
separate
this is
tax,
saying
no.
that you want a
Right.
separate parks tax. It's just saying that if what people's willingness to fund in terms of what they're willing to fund, but I don't think we're getting into defining that as a, hey, we're just going to have a 1 cent permanently dedicated Parks and Recreation Fund. I think it's generally stating that, you know what, you have financial support, but at what level you have financial support.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Next slide. So I just wanted to provide some quick feedback. We're still taking survey results, but this is really, really strong. I know that many of you are very much aware of the site-specific master plan project, not separate, but a part of this is those site-specific plans. So Tonsler Park, we had more shade, expand diversity, increased programming. Tonsler's kind of relatively built out. There's only so much we're going to be able to do, so we want to make sure that we absolutely listen to the community. There will be more information as we dive into the survey results that expand beyond this, but this is just from some of what we heard at the public meetings. Next slide. So in terms of Washington Park, a little bit more, improve restrooms, make more welcoming to neighborhood children. It's hard to really understand what's going on in Washington Park because it's really subdivided between the upper and the lower, and two very significant facilities kind of block your view shed into the park. ADA accessibility, parking location, building too small, really being able to access different areas of the park is challenging. The ball diamond and open play field should be maintained, but the community also has recognized that there should be a community garden there. What we will figure out through our process is where in the park is it most suitable for the community garden, given the adjacencies of all the different activities, and of course the opportunity to make sure that we don't have any conflict between a community garden and an athletic field, or a community garden and a swimming pool, and so on and so forth. So that is part of the next step associated with this. Next slide. Market Street, a flexible space, sports community events, outdoor learning as an extension of the library, people that work downtown, acknowledge the history of the park without it necessarily becoming the focal point of the park. And so there's more detail obviously to come, more comments, but these are some of the things that came out as part of Market Street. And then lastly, Court Square. Next slide, sorry. A Court Square, quiet contemplative state, sitting space, preserving shade trees, historical markers, memorials. This becomes more of the location where folks are really identifying it with history, the good, bad, and the indifferent associated with the site. But there will certainly be more detail associated with these site-specific master plans and the input that we're receiving, not just through the public meetings, but the focus groups and the online survey. And the last slide. So where are we gonna go? We have to take all of this information, synthesize it together. We're gonna present a version of this tomorrow evening at the Carver Recreation Center as part of a public meeting to get their feedback. We do have the project website open through Sunday, next Sunday. And then we will dive into individual park improvement plans as well as the site-specific plans. We have program and service plans, connectivity, capital improvement, and we are looking at organizational assessment, organizational structure as well. There's a lot of technical work that we will be presenting to you later this fall, but we wanted to start with the community engagement stuff because it's the foundation of any Parks and Recreation system, department, and master plan. So at this point, I'll take any other questions that you may have. Sorry, that was a little longer intended, but hopefully it was worth your time.
So we'll just start down with Michael, if you have any questions or comments.
Sure. A couple questions. One of the top priorities were connectivity to the river, as well as the location for the city market. Are those things as part of this master planning process that are going to be engaged with in terms of Riverview Park and how to engage with the future of the city market, or would those be things happening at a separate later point?
I think as part of this process, number one, we are doing connectivity analysis task. And so what that will do is take what Chris already knows and to take a look at it and help to prioritize it based on some of the very specific comments that we're getting from the community project website. There are folks that have dived in and said, hey, you know what, we need a better connection from the top of Washington Park down to the lower end of Washington Park. So the connectivity is within parks, but it's also to connect people to parks, the river, and so on and so forth. So that will be a very technical outcome associated with it, and also some dollars and cents associated with it. In terms of the farmers market, city market, we recognize that that has been a long-standing issue. If we identify an opportunity to solve it within a park, we certainly will, because we are doing park-by-park improvement plans, but it also may not necessarily work within a park, and so it will become, you know, a part of that ongoing conversation, with the understanding that your community, at least through the lens of Parks and Recreation, has raised it to a pretty high level of priority to resolve hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, because the river, I don't know if it's a separate process, but the river connectivity, I'm thinking specifically programming and thinking about the future of location of Rivanna River Company, that connection with Riverview Park and all that. And then I know it would be outside of this, but every time the city market comes up, it makes me think of Richmond and the depaving project they did on a significant surface parking lot, and if there's an opportunity to transform that surface lot by the Water Street Garage. The other question I have, I think, is just, it doesn't surprise me that 10th and Page, Fytheville, Rose Hill, that Parks and Rec programming was a much bigger priority.
Yes.
That matches informally, I've heard, there's a perception that since the pandemic, that really did a wallop to the amount of programming available that people feel still hasn't fully recovered. To me, that seems like a big potential growth area. And within Tonsler Park and Washington Park, is the plan going to be thinking about, are there physical infrastructure improvements that could help facilitate
Yes.
programming and community gathering? And okay.
Yeah, that the intention is to exactly what you're totally spot on, to take community needs, recognize that, say, Washington Park is a community park, but it's also very neighborhood oriented as well. Tonsler Park, we know, is relatively neighborhood oriented. The idea is to understand what each of those geographical areas wanted, and to use that as some foundational information around which to create basically site-specific framework plans that don't just say in narrative, this is what we should do, but it gives you a picture. But we need a landscape architect to be able to ensure that we're just not putting things in a park that just don't functionally work together. They don't work together when a person's trying to use it. So that's the integration of that. Plus, we also did park and facility assessments that have to play into that as well.
Right. And final question, with Court Square Park, obviously, that's near the location of what had been the slave auction block. There's going to be a completely new memorial there. Will the process for Court Square Park include thinking about potential integration with that new memorial, and if there's an opportunity for kind of park connectivity to that?
We do have all of those plans that are, we're just finishing up the community engagement for that. And so what we're doing is taking the community engagement, interfacing it with, say, the archaeological studies that were done on that site, and any other potential future plans to understand the context around which Court Square needs to sit. So it doesn't sit within a vacuum, right? And so what we're going to try to do is create a framework plan that recognizes not just what that grounds or area could or should be, but also the context in which it sits.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Shorter question. How long are these surveys available for the public to take?
Well, we have the online survey
Yes.
On the project website, and then the 4 specific plans through Sunday.
Through this Sunday?
Yep, and so we're going to make that known again tomorrow night to the public meeting. And it's interesting because Parks and Recreation, every time they send out a notice to the community, we see a spike. So the numbers I shared with you tonight are actually lower than what's actual, because I had to give you that presentation about 10 days ago. So, yeah, the numbers continue to climb, but we've got to cut it off at some point in order for us to do our work.
Absolutely. I just want everyone in the public who might be tuning in to know that they have until Sunday. And I have taken those surveys, and they're very brief, so you can definitely fit that into your day.
Thanks.
Lloyd?
Two thoughts. One, subject that I've always sort of had near and dear to my heart. It is not one of your priorities, even among the low priorities, and perhaps because you didn't ask, is whether there is any interest in making sure that there is some place in the city where kids can go sledding when it's snowing.
You know what? That's a great point. I can tell you that Washington Park has long been maybe not a safe location, but definitely a location that people have taken upon their lives upon themselves to do that. That's interesting. And you know what? I appreciate that comment. As I said, we're not doing a framework plan for every park. We're just doing those 4. But you providing that comment is important because we are going to look at park by park improvements. And so we will identify a narrative. We'll take a look and see if there is a best possible park to incorporate that.
I mention it in part because about 30 years ago, when my kids were young, I live a block from Greenbrier School. The hill on Greenbrier, on the side of Greenbrier School, was a perfect place to go sledding until when they redid the baseball diamond there, they put a fence across the bottom. And so now if you go sledding down the hill, you better hope you stop before you hit the fence. And that's an instance where the consultants who were talking to us at that point completely ignored that detail of what the folks in the neighborhood said. At the moment, I think the only public place that's available to do any significant sledding is at Washington Park, which, I'm not saying.
Steep.
It's pretty steep, but I'm not saying that every place has got to have a place to go sledding, particularly with the way climate change is going. It may be less and less of an issue, but I think it's one of those things that I think people don't think about until 6 inches of snow have fallen, and now they're saying, where can my kids go sledding? The second thing that I hope we will make sure that we preserve is some areas of simply unprogrammed space.
Yes.
That open play space for neighborhood pickup football games or something like that. Related to both of these concepts is the extent to which we might use the school grounds of the various schools to fill some of those neighborhood needs. Again, thinking of Greenbrier, we don't have to worry about having a basketball hoop in the backyard because we've got basketball hoops down the street. Same thing Venable, same thing a lot of other parks.
Correct.
Open play spaces, again, we don't have to worry about having room for a pickup football game in the backyard because we've got the school down there. At one point, probably 25 years ago, there was an official declaration that we were going to treat school grounds as part of the park system. I don't know if that's still an official position of the park system, but that also, again, thinking about Greenbrier in particular, there is an area kind of up behind Greenbrier where it's forested, and there actually is some Eagle Scout project some time ago had put sort of a nature trail back along there, which has been completely ignored ever since that kid graduated. And so I don't know whether there's anything going there, but it's a sort of place that I think we know, for example, Buford, there had been more of such room available before the redesign and the renovations.
Right.
There may be pockets at some of the other schools. I think there may be some property down at sort of the bottom end of Jackson Via, for example, that may be useful in some way. It may not be useful for a football field, but it may be useful for a nature area or something like that. And I hope that we will think kind of creatively about how all of these spaces might be used.
Yep, you got it. Thank you much. And yes, we still do create, park school grounds are certainly treated as neighborhood parks.
Okay, Brian?
First, thank you. It's a very comprehensive report and presentation. I feel like we're definitely going to end up with a good product. When you're doing this work, are you also thinking about possibly where we might need a new park? I know we're purchasing land in the meadows for our future park. Is that part of what you're thinking about when you're doing this?
Yes, and here's how we are approaching this. We are not going to approach this, and we had this conversation with Mr. Frias just last, fall maybe, winter. We had a conversation that said, how do we want to approach a level of service in Charlottesville for the Parks and Recreation System? We are not going to approach it in an acres per thousand, because if we did that, it's going to show that Charlottesville has way more acreage than it needs. But what we're going to approach it is through the lens of accessibility and equity. And so there's a couple of polar opposite things that the powers that be at the national level talk about, which I always find kind of interesting. One, we're supposed to take 10,000 steps a day. The other is we want to have a park within 10 minutes, walking distance. It kind of doesn't work together. But we are really trying to create and look at it through the lens of saying, do we have green space? Even if it's just open space, within 10 minutes of everybody walking. Charlottesville actually has a pretty high percentage of that right now, but there are some gaps, the Meadows area in particular. So what we're going to do is identify, instead of a specific location or a size of a park, but to identify the areas within the community or area within the community where an additional park needs to be made. And we're going to do that through a mapping exercise. So it's not just in narrative, so you can physically see on a map where that needs to be.
Got it. And then you may have said this, and I just missed it, but there's 4 parks that you're going to do framework plans for: Tonsillar, Washington, Market, and Court. Is that right?
Correct.
What
There's
was
actually a
it?
5th one. We are doing Kindlewood as well. We just didn't do any
Okay.
community engagement because that's already been done.
Got it. Okay. All right, I can see why those would be. And then you're also doing for all of the parks, a park by park assessment of facilities, how much
Correct.
it's used,
So
opportunities to improve and that sort of thing.
exactly. So we have done, we've done the needs, so we've identified that. We have done a park and facility assessment
Okay.
of the locations. We're going to kind of put that together, and there's going to be 2 buckets, right? The first bucket is all the parks that fall outside of the framework plans. The framework plans are going to get the pictures and the cost estimate. All the other parks are going to get the words and the cost estimate. But you basically will end up with a park, an improvement plan for every park, and a cost estimate for implementing that
Nice.
as part of this master plan.
Good, great, thank you.
I know we're low on time, but I have one quick question
Sure.
that I want to add, sorry. So in some of the surveys, the questions brought up parking facilities. And since a lot of these are neighborhood parks that are within walking distance of a lot of the people who use them, I found that curious to include parking as kind of such an upfront thing when a lot of people should just be able to, get there.
Yeah.
But then there's the problem of biking infrastructure in particular is not yet adequate enough to get everywhere you need in town.
Correct.
How closely are you all working with our transportation department to ensure that access by bike and ped is included in the plans for all these parks?
Yeah, so we are not, I would say that we are really focused on trails and the connectivity that Parks and Recreation can control, with the understanding that we don't want to duplicate, right? We don't want to suggest that you have a recreational trail that is also in the exact same area where transportation is planning, bike lanes or something, widening of sidewalks or so on and so forth. So we are going to really rely on Chris's expertise to ensure that we get the prioritization of the connectivity analysis right, and knowing full well that we're not doing a full-blown bike ped, trails master plan, but we're just trying to prioritize connectivity, recognizing this plan has a 10-year planning horizon, and that some of what Parks and Recreation control is what we want to focus on, but fully recognizing that other potential prioritization through the bike ped plan potentially realized with transportation. So I don't know if. Yeah, sure.
Just so you're aware, I am on the city's transportation team. I work with them all the time, and they certainly help with those projects that end up being paved trails next to roads, everything going on in hydraulic, the bridge over 29. So getting a park in the meadows so they don't have to come all the way across is one thing, but then making sure they can. So as we implement all of this, I'm right there with the transportation team, engineering and all that kind of stuff, VDOT, so, yes.
Okay, awesome, thank you, appreciate that.
I just had a couple of comments. One, I love the outreach map. That's really helpful. I love that. It really kind of shows where you've gotten this response. And this is a small thing, but the question 24 about the percentages, that doesn't equal 100. I don't know if you.
Which one? With the
one 68.1 and 17.1. It doesn't equal 100. It's like equals like 90.
Yeah, it's probably just those are the top groupings. But I'll go back and check
Yeah, if you could send me those numbers,
Yep.
what it is to equal 100, and this is real live, and I was contacting Aileen through as we were meeting, but some residents of the Rose Hill contacted me about the garden, and I think it should need to be some further discussion, which I'm happy to be part of, about what that would look like and the impact on the park, and just to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard. I know y'all met with them earlier this month, actually. So, but
absolutely no problem.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? This is great. So, end of the year, or beginning of the year time frame, roughly, we should have it done.
Yeah, we'll be to you one more time before we bring adoption to you. So we're going to work through that exact timeline this week. We'll be able to provide the exact timelines in which we're to you in the next few months.
Great. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
Great job. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Thanks, counselors.
Can we get a motion to go into closed session, please?
I have it here. One second, sir.
No, that's fine.
Thanks.
Okay. A motion for a city council closed session pursuant to section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code. I hereby move the city council close this open meeting and convene in a closed session as authorized by Virginia Code section 2.2-3711A1 for discussion and consideration of assignment, appointment, performance, demotion, salary, discipline, and/or resignation of a specific named employee of the public body, and for discussion and consideration of prospective candidates for appointment to the following city boards and commissions: Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund Committee, Charlottesville Albemarle Airport Commission, Charlottesville Albemarle Convention and Visitors Bureau Executive Board, Community Development Block Grant Task Force, Community Police Policy and Management Team, Housing Advisory Committee, Human Rights Commission, Jaunt Board of Directors, Jefferson Area Community Criminal Justice Board, Jefferson Madison Regional Library Board, Local Board of Building Code Appeals, Minority Business Commission, Retirement Commission, Sister Cities Commission, Social Services Advisory Board, Towing Advisory Board, Vendor Appeals Board, and the Youth Council.
Oh, we got a lot to do. Let's go. No, can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, can we vote? Thank you. We'll be back at 6:30. Thank you.